The prosecution started with that video. They played that video in full. There are a lot of Americans out there who have seen pieces of the video, or if they've seen the entirety of the video, they haven't seen it in a year. What did you make of the prosecution beginning the case with all of that?
I thought it was the right way to start it because at the end of the day, no matter how you argue this case, whether you are on one side or the other, the real core of this case is that for over 9 minutes, this man laid there for almost half of it, limp and dying, pleading for his life, saying he couldn't breathe a score of times, calling for his mother who was dead, saying, "I love my children." And this police officer, despite the fact that bystanders were arguing and yelling at him, "He's dying, stop, this is not going to work," none of them physically going after the officer, standing back, yelling at him, respecting his office, but also respecting this light that was literally leaving them in their eyes. It was heart-wrenching to watch that today. And I was in the overflow room because of COVID. Only one member of the family can sit in the actual courtroom on both sides. One member of Chauvin's family, one member of George Floyd's family. So I was in the overflow room provided for the family of George Floyd. I was there as a minister who they had to do the eulogy at two of the funerals. And some of the relatives of George had never seen that particular video where the exchange was going down between the bystanders and Chauvin and the other officers. They broke down and cried. For them to watch their loved one, their cousin, their brother, his brothers are there in court, to watch their cousin literally die and beg for his life was too much for them to take even almost a year later. And it was heart-wrenching for me, as many times have I been in these cases as head of National Action Network, to sit there with that family with tears dripping and watch that video just play out exactly what happened. I think the prosecutor did the right thing by playing and putting in context of why that courtroom is important. Even though he said it doesn't have other ramifications, it really does. Chauvin is in the courtroom, but America is on trial on how it will deal with police accountability.
Rev, you were with the family. You're just laying it out. What was their reaction when the defense gave its opening statement and tried to paint George Floyd as somebody who had issues and who was solely responsible for his own death?
Well, the entire family's position was that even if you're going to argue that case, what does that have to do with your knee on his neck and him begging for his life? The fact Chauvin did not know of any other issues that he may have had, so they see it as immaterial and they feel that it is smearing a man after a man has been killed. And to try the victim rather than to try the situation is offensive to them. It is almost like adding insult to injury or pouring salt into the wound, because at the end of the day, whatever other issues he had, does it justify, and that's what the jury's going to have to decide, the actions of Chauvin, that the bystanders were begging him, Chauvin, or not by name, but begging the officer, leave him alone. At one point, he threatened the bystanders with pepper spray. I mean, the hostility and the venom. You know, before we went in the courtroom, Katie, we had a press conference outside with the family, and I asked everybody to take a knee for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. That's the time we thought. And people were again brought to terms with the fact, even if in a fit of anger, or if you're arguing defense, if you're Chauvin, that you started this, at some point, did it not become intentional that you would not relieve this man's pain, that you wouldn't step up and release your knee from his throat? So whether it was intentional at the 3rd minute, the 4th minute, or in the beginning, it really doesn't matter. It becomes criminal when it is intentional.
Reverend Al Sharpton, Shaquille Brewster, both of you from Minneapolis. Gentlemen, thank you very much. And let's go now to our legal panel. Georgetown law professor, former federal prosecutor and author of Chokehold, Paul Butler, and former senior FBI official and former U.S. attorney Chuck Rosenberg. Both are MSNBC contributors. Paul, I want to get your take on the first witness. Defense called the 911 dispatcher. Prosecution called her. And they said essentially that she called the cops on the cops. She was watching the surveillance video, watching the arrest unfold, and she said something didn't seem right about what was happening. So she called the police officer's superior, and she alerted that man. And she even said, "You can call me a snitch." What do you make of her testimony? How important, significant will it be?
You know, I thought Jenna Scurry was a very credible witness. She's doing her job as a 911 operator. She's kind of seen it all, but she testified that what she saw Derek Chauvin doing to George Floyd was different. We heard in the 911 call that she made to the sergeant that she saw officers sitting on George Floyd. She says that she knew something was wrong, and that's why she had to call the supervisor. She's never done this before about a use of force by a police officer. So in the prosecution opening statements, we were told that we would hear stories about law enforcement officers calling the police on the police, people who work as first responders who were so concerned about what they saw Derek Chauvin doing that they felt the need to alert supervisors. I think that's going to be very powerful testimony for the jury.
So we're expected to go back into this trial at 2:30 Eastern Time, 1:30 local in Minneapolis. They are on a lunch break right now, at which point the defense will cross-examine the 911 dispatcher. Chuck, what should we expect from that cross-examination?
Right. Well, first of all, I agree with Paul. I thought that the 911 dispatcher was thoughtful and credible. And the fact that she had not before, asked the sergeant to intervene in a situation like this was telling. So what does the defense try and do? What they're going to try and do with this witness and with others is point out a couple of things she doesn't know, things she didn't see. They will argue, for instance, that she doesn't know all of the circumstances that the defendant, that Officer Chauvin, encountered. And you can begin to try and tell the story of your case through your questions on cross-examination. It's not an easy thing to do, but the defense has a theory. In other words, that that Officer Chauvin acted appropriately, at least within the bounds of good policing, and that George Floyd presented a threat, and that he died not of Officer Chauvin's knee on his neck, but rather because he was both unhealthy and his system had drugs in it. And you will hear those types of questions. She may say, "I don't know," in response to the questions that she's asked, but the questions are what matters here. The defense wants the jury to hear those questions because they will hear them repeatedly. And one other thing, Katie, if I may, and I know Paul knows this well, what we say in the end doesn't matter so much. The case will be in the hands of 12 people in 3 or 4 weeks. In order to acquit Chauvin, which I find unlikely on all counts, they would have to agree unanimously that he was not guilty. But to convict him on any count, they would also have to agree unanimously that he is guilty. And so the defense attorneys are looking for one vote here or there. And any one question with any one witness could sway one juror on one vote. That's a hung jury. That's a mistrial. And from a defense perspective, that's a victory.
So as the defense tries to say that the way Derek Chauvin acted was proper, how much are they going to rely on what we saw in that last video that was played that the 911 dispatcher felt uncomfortable with, where he was put in the car, put in the police cruiser, and then pulled out and then put on the ground and restrained on the ground, Chuck?
Yeah, well, look, there's some real bad facts for Officer Chauvin. Don't misunderstand, Katie, what I'm saying. And if you do misunderstand it, it's probably because I'm not saying it very clearly. There are some really bad facts for Chauvin.
I understand.
But what they will do is focus on the things that can sow confusion: the toxicology reports, the pathology report, the autopsy. They'll have their own sets of experts. They'll call witnesses about police use of force. They'll point out that Officer Chauvin's chokehold was not against Minneapolis Police Department policy at the time. And so a good defense attorney will not question every single thing that the prosecution puts in, and he may even take a pass on questioning some of their witnesses on cross. But he will have a theme, and if he's good at it, he will stick to it and hammer home points that are helpful to his client. Folks keep saying that this is an easy case for the prosecution. There's no such thing as an easy case for the prosecution.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.
And let's bring in criminal defense attorney Bjorn Brunvand for more on how this trial has played out so far and maybe what we might see today. Bjorn, thanks for being here. The defense declined to cross-examine Charles McMillan. He was the bystander who got very emotional yesterday on the stand, described himself as being nosy. He's just a man who likes to walk around the neighborhood and so on. And so that's how he ended up involved in this encounter, trying to talk to George Floyd as all this was happening. Why did the defense make that choice not to cross-examine him? What's the strategy there?
Well, obviously, he was extremely emotional. This was a very emotional event that he witnessed, a tragic event that he witnessed, and there was really nothing to accomplish for the defense to cross-examine this witness.
Now, those body cam videos are also very hard to watch, but the prosecution played them back to back yesterday. What's the strategy there?
Well, I think the body cam videos are just devastating and for the defense. They're incredibly difficult to watch. I've now watched them multiple times, and I'm certainly used to looking at horrific crime scenes and what have you. But it's to watch Mr. Floyd begging for his life and law enforcement basically ignoring him. And not paying attention to the fact that he's clearly in distress and not paying attention to the bystanders who are desperately trying to get them to pay attention to a fellow human being who's clearly suffering and ended up dying.
And so, as a prosecutor, why play them back to back instead of maybe spacing them out or only playing one of them? What do you think they're trying to do there?
I anticipate that we're going to see videos, body cam videos, and other videos throughout the trial. It's not going to be just during that moment. It's going to be probably played again with the various experts that they have indicated that they're calling in their case to try to help explain their testimony and also to repeatedly show these very damaging videos to the jury.
And so the jury has now seen this incident from several different angles, several perspectives and cameras. Given what you just described is in those videos, how does the defense come back this morning and try to counter that sight of George Floyd motionless for several minutes while these people are begging the officers to get off of him? How does the defense now come back from that?
You know, it's I believe, incredibly difficult. Generally, when we have evidence that is very emotional, very damaging, you have to try to embrace the evidence in some way and accept, what's there. I mean, to try to argue, don't believe your lying eyes and ears just doesn't work. So I think the defense needs to embrace it. They need to recognize how horrific these videos are and how horrific the events were, and probably focus on the experts and the cause of death and whether or not there may be another explanation as to why he passed other than what law enforcement was doing.
Now, we also saw a new video of George Floyd inside the convenience store, the Cup Foods, before his arrest. How will the defense try to make that work in their favor?
I don't know how the defense can make the video inside the store in their favor. I mean, he's walking around. He He's having dialogue with the people in the store. He doesn't seem to be threatening at all. I don't see anything favorable to the defense about the video of him inside. There's no indication that he's being threatening or doing anything inappropriate.
Yeah, and the Cup Foods employee testified to the same. Said he looked high, but otherwise he was friendly, he was approachable, and he was in no way out of control. Criminal defense attorney Bjorn Brunvand, it's great to talk to you. Thank you for your analysis.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.
When you knew Mr. Floyd, did you learn of his mother's death?
Yes.
Do you recall when that was?
It was in May of 2018.
And did you see, well, describe, if you would, for the jury, what you saw his reaction to his mother's death?
Pardon me. Floyd is Floyd's what I would call mama's boy. I could tell from the minute I met him. And when he came back from Houston, he seemed kind of like a shell of himself. Like he was broken. He seemed so sad. He didn't have the same kind of bounce that he had. He was devastated. He loved his mom so much, and I knew that. He talked about her all the time. I knew how he felt. It's so hard to lose a parent that you love like that.
Ms. Ross, thank you, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I'll see if I can ask some questions to help a little, okay? So he struggled with grief over his mother's death?
Excuse me, yes.
Okay. And going to change topics a bit, okay?
Okay.
All right. You need a minute? Are you okay?
I'm okay. I can do it.
You met Mr. Floyd at Salvation Army.
Yes.
And then proceeded to maintain a relationship with him.
Yes.
And I have to ask you if drug use was a part of that relationship.
Yes.
And what kind of drug use was a part of that relationship?
Floyd and I both suffered with an opioid addiction.
And do you know how, like for your own self, how you came to be involved, with what kind of drugs and how you became involved?
Opioids, yes. Both Floyd and I, our story, it's a classic story of how many people get addicted to opioids. We both suffered from chronic pain. Mine was in my neck and his was in his back. We both had prescriptions. But after prescriptions that were filled and we got addicted, and and tried really hard to break that addiction many times.
And were you each aware of each other's struggles with opioids?
Yes, eventually in our relationship we shared that.
And did you sort of work together on that issue?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And over how long of a period did this struggle go on for you, for both of you?
Addiction, in my opinion, is a lifelong struggle. So it's something that we dealt with every day. It's not something that just kind of comes and goes. It's something I'll deal with forever.
And were there periods of time when you were not using opioids?
Absolutely.
And same question with regard to Mr. Floyd.
Yes, absolutely.
And were there times when you knew that he was using opioids more than by prescription?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
And when you weren't using, prescription opioids, where did you get them?
Off the street. Okay. On the black market.
And you knew that he was doing that as well?
Yes.
And turning your attention to, well, let me ask you this. You were in a relationship for nearly 3 years.
Yes.
And did this use of opioids beyond even prescriptions sort of continue throughout that 3-year period for Mr. Floyd?
Yes.
And something that you saw yourself and were aware of?
Yes.
And to ask the same question of you, did you struggle using during that entire period?
Yes.
And were there times when you would use together?
Yes.
And for what you saw Mr. Floyd using, what form of opioids did he typically use?
Oxycontin or oxycodone, and any kind of oxy.
And how did he get that? How did he use it?
Swallow them.
And so in pill form?
Yes. Sorry.
That's right. Not the easiest question to ask, for you. So I'm sorry.
Okay.
If you ever don't understand my question, feel free to ask.
Okay.
Or let me know. Okay. And so there were times when you would obtain non-prescription opiate pills together?
Yes, there would be other people's prescriptions.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
They would be other people's prescriptions.
And were there sometimes, why would you get them through other people's prescriptions? What do you mean?
To make sure they were safe.
And were there times then that you had to get pills other than, from what you knew were somebody else's prescriptions?
Yes.
And were there times when you thought that maybe Mr. Floyd wasn't using or was using, but not with you, not in your presence?
Yes. There was a time.
And were there times when you were using together, I guess that's a poorly worded question already. Let me just ask it this way. Did you use the same amounts when you used?
Yes.
And taking your attention to March of 2020, and there was a time in March when you knew he was back to using pills. Is that right?
I thought his behavior had changed.
Okay. What do you mean by that?
I think when you know someone who suffers with any type of addiction, you can start to kind of see changes when they're using again. And there's just slight behavioral changes that I noticed in him, and it just made me suspect.
And in March of 2020, did you also kind of fall back into using
Yes,
some?
I did.
So you, and were you two using together back in March, or you just suspected his use?
In March, yes, we did use together.
And was there a period then after March where you thought the two of you had both been able to quit for a while?
Yes, a long period.
And then kind of going forward to May of 2020, was there a time when you thought he might be using again?
Yes.
So in May, when you thought that, what led you to think that?
It was the same type of thing, just behavior changes in Floyd.
And did you also kind of fall back to using opioids in May of 2020?
One time, yes.
And he was aware of that?
Yes.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.